tuned in to the Andrew Lawton Show.
Andrew, good to talk to you again. Thanks for coming on today.
Thanks for having me back. It's great to be here.
Yeah, it's good to talk to you again. I enjoyed our last chat, which was that higher level discussion and some specifics as well about your experience in CSIS. And I wanted to actually use that experience as a jumping off point for this story, because obviously I've been covering on this show the Chinese interference stuff for several months now it's been. And I think the political side of it and the global geopolitical side of it has been well covered. But we haven't actually talked about the fundamental question here of what is in these reports, these documents that have now been leaked to the Globe and Mail and to Global News, and just to put some context around how people should be interpreting what they're reading about these things. So let me just ask you, generally speaking, as someone who devoted your life for a time to service in CSIS, how did you feel when you learned that there was a leak?
Yeah, I wasn't too happy about it. I've been very defensive about the organization. I'm not happy with the leaks. I don't think that's a whistleblower. I think they're leakers. We take
explain that difference, because I know there is one.
So I think a whistleblower, and I'm not a lawyer, so don't quote me on the legal definitions, but where there is a blowing the whistle on illegal activities or wrongdoing, or where I think there's some protections around releasing otherwise sensitive information, where it's in this very specific, circumstances. Whereas in this case, I think it was just a situation where the person took sensitive classified documents and kind of dumped them on the public. And I don't think they exposed certainly no wrongdoing of the organization. These were reports that were sent out and through appropriate channels. And this person felt like they wanted more people to read them, which is not in our independent, we're not allowed to make those decisions independently on the collection side, right? Like CSIS has its role, which is to collect, analyze, and advise government on threats to national security. And then the deciders decide, right? We may not always be happy with what they decide, but that's the way it kind of works. That's how the system works together. So, when I see somebody kind of breaching on the advising part because they don't feel like the deciders made the right decision, I said, well, that's not our job. That's not their decision to make. And that's why I felt, I said, not very comfortable, because there are repercussions, ramifications, right? When I was out there, we're talking about last time as an intelligence officer, knocking on doors and asking people to give me confidential, secret, information that I can then, put in reports and investigate national security. I'm promising confidentiality. I'm saying the things you tell me, will be protected, and take that oath. And when we work with our partners in Five Eyes community, we give them the same promise of protection and maintaining the integrity of the information. So when it gets out, it's a really bad look. Now, in this case, I think it's our own information that we've compromised. So I don't know if our partners will be upset with us, but this is sensitive stuff. These are things, I'm not sure the specific sources of them, but it really does get into sources and methods, and maybe people can make some observations about how this information was collected. And so those people we're investigating can better protect themselves from our investigative measures, right? Which is, what we don't want to happen. So I mean, it's a long answer, but don't like it. I know many of my former colleagues don't like it. I'm sure the organization doesn't like it. And whatever we think about the value of the information we have, a lot of people say, well, this is good that we know about these things. It's important to remember there's a cost to that as well. There's a risk when our information gets out like this. So I just don't want to forget that.
Now, I would just point out here, you're a former conservative candidate provincially in 2018, so I don't know how you identify politically now, but you're not a partisan liberal. This isn't coming from a place of supporting the Liberals, which is, I think, where a lot of the defense of your position on that has come from in the last couple of months.
You know what? It's really been interesting. So I put out a tweet on tweet. I don't tweet a lot. I don't love social media, but
that's probably good. That's probably wise.
I know. So I may be a bad candidate, but I put out a tweet about how I did not appreciate the leaks. I did not like the whistleblowers, column there in the Globe and Mail saying, this is why I did it. The person who called himself a whistleblower, I just said he was a leaker. This is why I did it, and all these things. So, I wrote a what I think was a harsh but fair kind of a Twitter thread, and it was retweeted by liberal supporters and partisans, and I'm sure some bots. And I kind of joked myself, wait till they find out that I ran for the PCs. There's a lot of things with I hate Doug Ford in the hashtags. And I was like, I ran, So in my opinion, this is a nonpartisan issue. It shouldn't be a partisan issue. All parties are at risk. All levels of government are at risk. It doesn't have to be a partisan issue. It's become one, unfortunately. But yeah, it's definitely been a talking point on one side. And I said, coming from a former PC candidate in 2018, yeah, by no means a partisan liberal supporter. I think you can safely say that.
But let's take the position you've put forward and advance it a bit, because I agree that whistleblower protections generally are when someone is exposing legal wrongdoing, and generally within their own organization. And in this case, I think actually CSIS comes off quite well in the leak, and it's the government that comes off not particularly well. But assuming we take it all at face value, and we'll get into that in a couple of moments, we have allegations that China was interfering, that CSIS knew about it, that they had some very specific examples of politicians and candidates that were either involved or were the passive beneficiaries of this support. CSIS takes this to the government, and it looks like the government did not take this seriously. I think that's what the reports that we've seen have shown. So what is the proper recourse? Because there's a part of what you're saying that it sounds like it's just to say, oh, well, the government had that call and maybe another government will take it differently.
Well, you're saying on behalf of the leaker or the people who are so.
Well, I'm trying to understand what your position is on what should have happened in this case, if anything. If someone were very frustrated that this was getting handed to the government and they weren't taking it seriously.
Well, look, it kind of goes to our previous point there. I ran for office. You want to be a decision maker? You go and become a decision maker. You want to go work for a political party. You think that things are not happening that you want to see happen. You volunteer, you get involved, you be a public person, you advocate for your positions. You don't have to necessarily put your name on the ballot, but you can go be a staffer and try to go to a ministry or some area that you're passionate about and knowledgeable about and say, these are the policy positions that I think that we should take. I think that, more than anything is probably my frustration because if this person, and I don't know who this person is or whether they work for CSIS or not, and I think it's a lot of people, I guess, is what we're seeing too. If they were a very public senior person that had access to this information and they was, resign their post and said, the reason I'm resigning is because I don't think we're taking this issue seriously. There are a lot of public reports that they can point to that would demonstrate that. I mean, we have what INSERA, I always get the acronyms wrong, so apologies for that, but the INSERA and NCCOP, we've been doing, CSIS has been putting out reports on foreign interference for years. The CSIS has been reviewed and the recommendations have come from parliamentary committees or NCCOP that's nonpartisan, that's chaired by a liberal MP, and they're saying their recommendations, things that we should be doing. Those recommendations haven't been adhered to. So there's plenty of public information that suggests that this is a problem that should be actioned without just kind of dumping the sensitive reporting on it into the public. I think that so. Yeah, that was one of my points to the person to say, hey, look, come on out, put your name to it. Like, let's talk about it if you want to talk about it, and not in a threatening way, but like, I think that would almost do better. I was in a meeting and I don't think we did a good job with this and we should do better. For me, that's a more convincing argument, to be honest, than letting this play out this way.
Yeah, and I mean, to be honest, my view on this, and you may have some people that, whether you call them a leaker or a whistleblower, they think they're smarter than the system and they think they can leak it and keep their identity guarded and never be outed. But you would have to assume that someone doing this, knowing what they're doing, would be doing it with the full expectation that they're going to be identified and they're going to be punished in some way, whatever that is. And in that way, it almost looks more favorably upon you if you do just come out and name yourself before someone else names you.
Yeah. And I don't want to, harp on too much on the one person, and as I don't know the situation and who that person is, right? But this is coming from somebody who wrote a book. I mean, I wrote a memoir about working for CSIS, and you better believe that I was concerned about considered and was concerned about my Security Information Act obligations. And, they say you're only kind of guilty when the judge finds you guilty, but I had my name and my face in the book. And so I was ready to say, this is why I said it. This is what I think. It's not in violation. I didn't do names of former colleagues or any operational, information that can give things away. But I acknowledge people might be mad at me. I acknowledge that the CSIS was not going to be happy about the book being written. So, yeah, it's not a great feeling. I'm sure the person has got all sorts of stuff going on inside of them about what they feel they need to do, what they feel they want the public to hear, and what their obligations are. But yeah, I think that maybe would have been, if they really want to have that conversation, you got to kind of have it. You got to lead it. You got to be in front of it, because what's happened with things are coming left and right and showing up in newspaper articles one day and the next article the next day, it kind of gets away. It can get a little muddled.
I assume there's not, one centralized database of CSIS documents and information and reports that any of the, 3,000 some odd employees at CSIS can go and peruse at their leisure. Things are, I assume, quite siloed and segmented. So let's talk about just the logistics of how many people would likely have access to information of this nature on a particular file. And I'm assuming it would vary, but when you're getting into this level of specificity, are we talking about 5 people, 50 people, 500 people?
Well, I don't know the exact numbers, or could I probably say, but I'll say this, that, the classified or sensitive documents that were, leaked, those were distributed to a large number of people. I think they were across the Five Eyes, so the number of other intelligence services, to I think PCO, PMO. Like there's a big list. Once kind of those get out of the organization, and I don't know how many people are on that mailing list, but it's not one, right? It seemed like they were a few. And when you start getting into specific reports that were sent out, yeah, you can probably drill down who's on the receiving list of a report, who is on the inside of a case file, working specific investigations. Absolutely, that stuff is pretty tightly controlled. I think if you work with or for the service, and you can be pretty confident that they do a good job of protecting it. And to your earlier question about will this get out, the more information the people reveal about what they know, the easier it's going to be to narrow down, who had access to all of that information. I think that's ultimately what you're getting down to. They are tightly controlled. Not everyone gets access to everything. There's this you need to know principle. You hear, you may be familiar with it, but even if you have the highest levels of national security, even if you're cleared to whatever the highest clearance is, if you don't need to know that information, then you should not be provided that information. You don't get read in on every file. I can't walk down the hall at CSIS and say, "Hey, what are you working on?"
Hey, what's happening in China today?
Yeah,
what's happening in Afghanistan today?
What's going on? What's going on over there, right? You're generally restricted to what you have specific access to. Now, certain areas would have, that can be broad. When I was working there and I was in a support desk, that can mean a lot of different files in a very kind of shallow level, a lot of different investigations. Or someone working one investigation with a tight team will have all the information on, a very small investigation. So yeah, it's interesting to see as these things come out. I make assessments about, okay, like how close was this person to the reporting versus, or the collection of the information versus the reporting, which would be on, was this distributed to a decision maker, and therefore, they're getting selective intelligence and saying, why am I the only one who got this and more people need to hear? Or is it somebody who is, collecting this information, passing it up and feel like it's not going anywhere? I think those are different things.
I saw a Twitter thread from someone recently, and I can't recall who it was, and I think they probably had some connection to the intelligence world, that said intelligence reports are not to be taken as 100% ironclad fact. They're meant to be reports that are then taken along with other various inputs. We saw that during the Public Order Emergency Commission, where CSIS had this report and the government ultimately found something else. So I'm just curious if you could shine some light on that. I mean, these documents, and I don't know the formal title of them, and there are probably several. What is the proper way to receive those? Is there a margin of error on these things, or is it as certain as it comes, or as certain as CSIS is when these things are put in paper?
Yeah, I mean, the nature of intelligence, it's dynamic, it's kind of evolving. You can have, you're building a picture and you're trying to provide information and assessment of that information. You're processing information into, in this case, intelligence assessments to say, this is, what we think is happening. This is the picture. But yeah, getting it right or wrong, or just making informed links, and then later on information comes up that challenges that hypothesis or changes it a little bit, or put some context and nuance onto reports. So, in a case like this, or in the fact that this is a threat like this, that CSIS is a core part of CSIS's mandate, that's foreign influenced activities, that is kind of a nuanced threat. You will see reporting that comes out that is just trying to provide people a picture of what's going on, that they can make decisions based on, right? And that's why it is great, right? It is, you make the best decisions you can. You make risk-informed decisions, threat-informed decisions. And I think that's one of the concerns you have is, well, did this person who is access to information, they have access to everything? Or are they selectively getting access to it? Do they know what risk mitigation is put in place? So, what decisions were made with that information? That is, we don't know. That's not always provided. What kind of is happening behind the scenes? We kind of see, okay, well, they got this and they did that, but we don't know everything they got. We don't know everything they did, right? And that's, I think, one of the challenges with getting selective leaks of documents is, it's not going to provide the whole picture. I'm not saying the information passed along is wrong. I'm not saying that the documents given weren't, like, at the time, accurate pictures of what we knew then or about the specific threat then. But it's hard to say, like, this is the smoking gun, right? It's that doesn't always the case in these types of investigations.
Yeah, and it's funny because I know that some of my audience right now is like seething because we've been going hard on this story based on these reports for the last, not at you, just probably at me more than anything, because they know I've been talking about this. And it's one of these things, as a journalist, I'm inclined towards more information, and the more the better, and then we can decide from it. And I realize there is perhaps it's a philosophical point more than it's a legal point about what the limit is. At what point does it become justifiable to do this? And I think, there is one sort of takeaway. If you feel it's worth staking your life and your career and the legal punishments on, then okay, let the cards fall where they may.
Well, I want to say this to folks too, because I get asked a lot about the leaks and the documents, those types of things, and I feel like I want to present that context, which is these have threats and risks, and let's add nuance to it. But I dedicated 10 years of my life to investigating threats to national security, and many of my colleagues have as well. This is one of them, right? Mm-hmm. So I do not want to discount the risk. I do not, and the threat. I do not want to come across in any way that's saying that there's nothing to see here and nobody worried. No, that is absolutely not the case, right? The CSIS has been putting in their public reports. There have been recommendations coming out of government bodies that this is a threat, this is a concern, this is something we should do more about, and there are legitimate questions to be asked 100% about what did the government know and what did they do? And was that appropriate, right? And if they did, and then there's the nuance, which is, well, look, if they didn't do more, is that because they benefited, right? And I think everyone wants to get, and those are absolutely 100% fair questions that we should be asking, which people are calling for public inquiry or more sunlight and more transparency, and I agree. So, I don't want to discount that and be used to say, well, the leaker is not a whistleblower, and therefore, this is a big brouhaha about nothing. Absolutely not. We have an intelligence service that's been working on this. We've been sending reports up, and it is a real threat, and we should do more 100%. So yeah, I get the blowback. I get the frustration. Yeah. I always feel like, because I'm from the intelligence community, I need to say, look, guys, don't put my former colleagues at risk by dumping sensitive intel out. But my goodness, there's plenty of public information that says this is a problem that we should be doing more about. This has sparked a conversation about that. And yeah, I'm not saying there's no public benefit. I'm just saying I wish we didn't get here because of leaks.
Yeah, and I agree, process is important. I mean, it's the old thing about, if police search someone without a warrant and they find something there, but they weren't allowed to have searched in the first place, there's a remedy available to that person. So I know it's not a perfectly analogous situation, but you can't just take this Machiavellian approach to these things, which I think we can agree on in principle, if not necessarily in the specific case here.
You might like this leak, you might not like the next one. And if we're going to rely on individual people who feel empowered to do it, I don't think that's a great system.
Yeah.
So whatever we feel about this, but once again, foreign interference, that's a core CSIS mandate threat since 1984 that our security intelligence service has been asked to investigate and advise government on, and they've been doing that. And now we got to figure out, so what do we do, what do we not do, why, and what should we do going forward now that we are having this conversation, because that will require further action. And as a political candidate, I have some insight in how nominations work, and those are messy things. That's no easy solutions on how to tidy those things up for the political process, but clearly, I think there are steps that we can and should take.
All right. Well, the fantastic book written by this gentleman, Andrew Kirsch, is I Was Never Here, My True Canadian Spy Story of Coffees, Codenames, and Covert Operations. You can, in the age of terrorism, you can get that on Amazon and Indigo, and I would encourage you to read it. It was a lot of fun, and you can also check my interview with Andrew from several months ago to get a little bit more information about that. Andrew, thank you so much for your time and candor, sir.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to The Andrew Lawton Show. Support the program by donating to True North at www.tnc.news.